God bless you. You will enjoy Dr. Llaguno.
Good afternoon. Hello. Do I have the mic? Is it okay? Anyway, I think it was very strategic for the planners of this program to have health reform right after a meal. Part of it is because I realized that after I always make a lecture on health and diet, people start to look into the plates of the other, isn't it? And they think that I am policing what they're eating. Remember, it is you who's responsible to your health. And Pastor Muemba actually mentioned that after hearing this lecture, you are ready for translation. I don't think you're going to be ready for translation because we don't have what we call salvation by diet. But rather, you are going to be ready for tribulation. The tribulation of the disease, and of course, the coming tribulation that is come to the world. But it is a very grand opportunity for me to be able to address our literature evangelist, whom I consider to be the Marines of the church. You know Marines. What they do is that they are always the advance force to try to prepare the groundwork, to neutralize the enemy, so that when the actual army is going to be coming, it is not going to be so difficult. And true enough, so many times, you have been the one who had prepared the way for people to be able to preach the gospel and people to be receptive to the gospel. And similarly, when you are going to be the advance force, we need to prepare you for what is ahead. And one of the things that you need to know is really about health, which is very important. So our topic for this afternoon is health reform. We always hear people talking about health reform, but do we truly understand what health reform is all about? Okay? Now, this is the definition of health reform. It is a wholehearted acknowledgement that our bodies belong to God. The real principle of health reform is stewardship. Our bodies are not of our own. We owe it to God. And as a result, we are just caretakers of this property, for God is the owner of our bodies. So it is our sacred responsibility, since it does not belong to us, to keep it healthy, to maximize its full potential by observing healthful living. And these are the things that we need to know. These are really the basis of health reform. Number one, the Bible. Number two, the spirit of prophecy. And we should be very grateful that the Lord has entrusted to this church this message, which do not only belong to us, but He gave it to us to be given to the whole world. And number three, scientific evidence-based medicine. And let us look at this. But unfortunately, sometimes health reform becomes actually health deform. Even Mrs. White actually mentions about that. So many people do not understand the concept of health reform that it becomes health deform. And as you will notice, sometimes our churches are even divided on the lines of health. You have the extremists, both left and right. And that is sad, because that is really health reform. And let's see what are health reforms, okay? Now, what are the things that comprise, these are just the things that I've listed which would say about health reform. Number one, have you heard people saying that if you are going to eat meat, you cannot go to heaven? Quite a number. Number two, all drugs are harmful to the body, and therefore, we are not supposed to take any drugs. Number three, the use of herbal or natural, there are no side effects. Unfortunately, all of these concepts are really health deformed. Okay, you know, they always quote Mrs. White. They said, well, Mrs. White actually said, and in fact, one day, somebody gave me a note and said, you read this because Mrs. White really says, meat eaters cannot go to heaven. Well, you read it and it's true. She actually said. But what was the context that Mrs. White say that statement? See? Okay. Now, if you are very critical of people who are eating meat, and I know we have a lot of people who actually look into our plates and see what we are eating. Mrs. White, in Counsels on Diet and Food, actually page 334, which is message number 551, mentions that she would rather eat meat than sugar and pastries and rich cake. Now, who is the better person? The person who actually eats excess sugar or the person who eats meat, if this is the statement of Mrs. White? Tell me. I mean, yeah, if you're going to really look at this, Mrs. White is actually saying, I'd rather eat meat than rich pastries and cakes because a lot of sugar, a lot of milk, and a lot of eggs, which is really bad for the stomach. So now, if Mrs. White actually said that meat eaters cannot go to heaven, how much more people who are eating cakes? People who are eating pastries. The more you should be excluded, isn't it? Okay, let's see. Okay, meat eaters cannot go. What is the context that Mrs. White actually says this? Okay? As I said, she mentioned that excess sugar is more harmful than meat eating. Okay? And sometimes we as Adventists, we actually do not eat meat, but we are very excessive when it comes to desserts. All sorts of desserts, isn't it? You have Black Forest cakes, you have custards, you have all of those things. Okay. What did Mrs. White really mean about it? May I ask you a question? Is there going to be meat in heaven? No. Okay. And for that reason, actually, Mrs. White is saying those who are actually going to intend to go to heaven should prepare to eat the diet of heaven. Now, for instance, if you are a meat eater and you love your steak so much, and perhaps you find yourself being translated as Gift member actually said, oh, I can't believe it. I'm in heaven. Oh, God, thank you. Praise the Lord. I'm in heaven. And then you go into the pearly gates, and the first thing you want to do is celebrate, isn't it? But you're used to steak, so you ask the angel, Angel, can I please ask you to give me a steak medium rare? And the angel is going to say, you know what? Sorry, but we don't have any meat here. We don't serve meat. Well, maybe for 2 or 3 or 4 days or 5 days, maybe it is okay, isn't it? Now remember how powerful the appetite is. I wonder whether you can actually exist here for 1 week without bohobe or in Shima or whatever, pop, isn't it? Some even from Africa, some students of Africa, when they go to the United States to study, they even bring the mealy meal, isn't it? Because you see, you are used to that. And similarly, if we are going to be used to that kind of diet, you ask the question, are we going to be prepared for heaven? And that is the context that Mrs. White is trying to say. Those who are preparing to go to heaven should prepare for the diet of heaven. Okay. Remember, even the lion in heaven is going to be converted. Yeah, because it says in the Bible, the lion is going to eat straw. And imagine, the lion here is eating meat, and yet in heaven he's going to eat straw. That means he's a converted lion, isn't it? Okay. Since there is going to be no meat in heaven, we have to prepare for heaven. But you see, some people actually are going to say, you know, that is really a wrong concept because you see, when we go to heaven, God is going to change our taste buds. Isn't it? And what's the point of really changing ourselves here on earth if God is going to change us, including our taste buds? If that is the line of reasoning, here is what's going to happen. Now, what is the point of being sexually pure on this earth if God is going to change me in heaven? How come we are actually promoting that people should be sexually pure here, when in fact in heaven, we are going to be sexless? Is that bad news? No more desire in heaven. You ask the question, why are we preparing? Because you see, God wants us to be good stewards of our bodies. And that's really the principle. Okay, so if we are very interested, and I said the statement that Mrs. White made is for us to prepare ourselves for the diet of heaven and for eternity. Okay, all drugs are harmful to the body, and therefore, we are not supposed to take any drugs. I know some people say, if you're going to take drugs, you are not following the precepts of Mrs. White. Okay? And they even quote Mrs. White. But remember that Mrs. White herself use quinine when she was sick, okay? Let's look at it. This is what Ellen G. White actually says, that it has been shown to me that my drugs has caused more deaths than anything combined. That was actually mentioned in 1864. One of the first visions, the first vision of Mrs. White was in 1863. 1864, she had a vision that God said, I have been shown that more deaths have been caused by drugs. Remember, that was 1864. You have to look at this, at the context. It was said during the time of Mrs. White. Why did God show her that part? Okay? Let's see the practice of medicine, okay? I was shown that more deaths have been caused by drug taking than from all other causes combined, okay? Now, at the time Mrs. White had written this, there was only one book for medicine, and this is the book that was actually there, The Science and Practice of Medicine. Can you see how thin the volume is? These days, if you look at the textbooks that we have in medicine, I tell you, we have big volumes of books in medicine. But that was what we call the state-of-the-art book when Mrs. White mentioned about drugs. Okay, let us see. Now, for instance, rheumatic fever. We are aware that rheumatic fever goes to the heart. Okay, what was the treatment at the time which was stated in this book? It says, venesection, calomel combined with purgatives, and opium are the three remedies which should be used for rheumatic fever. Now, is that rational, you tell me? You may not be doctors, but I'll tell you. Venesection means I'm going to bleed you. I'm going to get some blood out of you. Number two, it says, okay, calomel is actually mercury chloride, which is a heavy metal, and that can cause damage to the brain and damage to the nerves. And if you are a pregnant mother and you are taking mercury, that mercury can actually cause deformities in your child. See? Okay, opium. These days, opium is illegal because you see it is habit-forming. So you can see that the medication prescribed in 1864 were these, which was really, in fact, poison rather than good medicine. Okay, for instance, gout. Maybe some of you are suffering from gout here, but here is what is happening here. It says sulfate of magnesia, okay, syrup of poppies, colchicum, saffron, mercury, okay, and we are going to see. Magnesium sulfate, well, we still use that one for pregnant mothers who have convulsions, so that's still okay, okay? But Hyos camus, an atropine-like herb, can actually cause your heart rate to increase. Now, poppies, another form of opium. Again, it is poison to the body. Mercury, it is again a toxic metal. Colchicum, well, today we are using colchicum as a way of actually treating people with gout. So you can see that the medications that were prescribed for this condition at the time were actually horrible. They were even dangerous and poisonous to the individual. Okay, how about beriberi? Okay, you know beriberi is actually, your heart is going to fail, you're going to have swollen legs. It is actually, but bleeding, squil and digitalis, spirit of nitrate, antimonial wine, and these are all poisons. Squil, white arsenic. Arsenic is very poisonous. Digitalis, well, right now, digitalis can actually be used. Okay? Spirit of nitrate, which is with nitrate and alcohol. Antimony, which is also a heavy metal that is poisonous. So you can see by these medications that were prescribed at the time that they were in fact poisonous. That's the reason why Mrs. White was shown in a vision, you see, that more deaths were caused by drugs than any other causes combined. Okay, we can actually go in more. Okay, let me just skip this one. Again, bleeding, mercury, all of these are poisonous. Okay, apoplexy or a CVA, that means they're again going to get some blood from you. Enema of turpentine. You know, turpentine is actually the one that they use to thin out paints, and you're supposed to drink that. Okay, for depression, for instance, you have opiates, you have India hemp. India hemp is marijuana. Okay, now, for those of you women at the time, if you were actually at the time of Mrs. White, and you had premenstrual syndrome, you know, you have cramps, some women have that. they have cramps in their bellies when they are going to go into menstruation. You will be surprised what was the medicine at the time. It says there, leeches to the vulva and thighs. You have to put it inside because it's going to suck and then it's going to actually make you feel better. Now, I don't know whether you're going to agree to this, but that was found in the book. Okay? So with all of that, you see, that's the reason why God showed Mrs. White that deaths have been caused by drugs. But how about today? Are we having a lot of deaths due to drugs? The answer is no, because these drugs have been really tested before they can go to the market. Imagine if you actually die of a drug and they have not mentioned it or it was not properly tested, you can sue the drug company. In fact, there was this drug called Vioxx, which they say that it is what we call a super aspirin. And they launched it. It was good also for pains in the joints. But later on, they found out that it can actually cause sudden deaths. And I tell you, the drug company had to recall that medicine because people were suing the drug company. And that's the reason why these days, it has to be properly tested before it goes into the market. Okay. Now, I know that there are some people who refuse to take drugs on the grounds that Mrs. White said that drugs are harmful. But as I said, that context was given at the time in 1864. And today, it is a different setting. Now, I know of two couples, a couple of Zambia. They were actually elderly. When we were still in Zambia working as missionaries, this old couple actually say, you know, Mrs. White say, we are not supposed to take any drugs at all. And both of them were suffering from malaria. I tell you, 2 weeks later on, the husband died. A week later on, the wife died because they didn't take any medications. Similarly, I know of a pastor in Zimbabwe. He was told, you know, Mrs. White said that you're not supposed to take drugs. He had high blood pressure. He was, I think, about 3 drugs at one time. And sometimes you cannot control your hypertension just by 1 or 2 drugs. You need about 3 drugs. And he was told, all you have to do is take lemons. So the pastor stopped his medication, and instead of taking his antihypertensive pills, he was taking lemons all the time. But you see, the lemons did not work, and unfortunately, one of the complications of high blood pressure is that your kidneys are going to fail. And so his kidneys stopped. Now, if your kidneys stop, they're going to hook you to a machine so that they're going to clean your body. That would cost about, let us say, about maybe 1,000 rand per session, which you're supposed to have 3 times a week. That means she was paying about 3,000 rands per week. Whereas, if that individual had taken medications, it would only maybe cost about 20 or less rands per day. But the sad news is that this man went to Pakistan for a kidney transplant. The operation went well, but unfortunately, out of the complications, he died. It's because, you see, people were telling him, do not take any medications at all. See? So we should be very careful on those prescriptions. Drugs for health. Now, if you ask the question, who is a better steward? Because we had mentioned that really the basis of all of this is what we call stewardship. Who is a better steward? The person who takes drugs so that he can extend his life, or the person who does not take drugs and die? You tell me. Who is a better steward? That's it. And this is it. You see, as we had mentioned, our bodies are the temple of God. If there are modalities wherein your life can be extended, you might as well use it, rather than you die and you can no longer serve God. Okay. Go natural. There are no bad side effects of herbs. It's common. You hear that, eh? Oh, you try this tea because you see it's better. Do not take drugs because drugs have side effects. But you take this plant, and this does not have any side effect at all. Is that true? And that's true. People say, take the natural because there is no side effect. But let's see. Now, how about tobacco? Is tobacco natural? Huh? Oh, How come we're not using it? You see, it's a fallacy to say that what is natural does not have any side effects at all. In fact, cyanide is also natural. You can get cyanide from the peeling of the cassava, and some people can even die eating of that. It's natural, and yet it can cause death. Okay, what else? How about air? Is air natural? Okay, but I tell you, if I am going to inject 50 ml of air directly into your bloodstream, immediately you're going to die. Because you see, you're going to have what we call air embolism, and it is just like having an air lock in your engine. Air, natural, and yet you can even die. How about water? Is water natural? But do you know that we can have actually an overdose of water? If you are going to force yourself to drink water, you might even collapse. There was one time there was a contest in America on who could drink this, this bottled water. And they were drinking and drinking and drinking. And finally, the lady, actually everybody were eliminated. Only one stood up. But you see, when she walked out, she fainted and she died. See? Because of water, you can actually die. Okay, so here we are. We say that when we have health reform, it should be based on the Bible. It should be based on the spirit of prophecy and what we call evidence-based medicine. So we go to the third part. What do you mean by evidence-based medicine? It has to be what we call scientific studies. Well, you might not be able to understand all of these studies, like, for instance, a double-blind, randomized, crossover, or whatever. That's really the gold standard for what we call a scientific-based evidence. Some people, only about a few are going to be tested, and they say, well, it's okay. It actually works. You should have quite a number of people. Not only that, but it can also be duplicated by other scientists. Okay, let's look at it. As we said, scientific methods of research. There are so many of these. Now, it should not be based by anecdotal. You know what anecdotal is? What is an anecdote? An anecdote is a story. You say, my grandfather was actually taking this medicine and he had cured his asthma. That is one story. You cannot base your findings or your conclusion just by one study. It has to be a number of people, not just one person. But usually this is what we do. We say, well, this person took this medication and he became all right. Or this person took the tea and he was healed from his maybe coughing or from his headache. That is what we call anecdotal. Now, if you have an anecdotal when it comes to herbs, there is also an anecdotal for smoking. Some people can also say, well, my grandfather was smoking for 70 years and he lived up to 86 years old. And you can actually hear that from people, but that is only one incident. But if you are going to pool all the people, you will find out that smoking is really bad for your health. So let us not base our facts on just one story. Okay, not only that, but we should be very careful, especially as literature evangelists, and this is where we want to make it careful to you, that when we are going to be selling these books of health, because there are so many health books in the market today, it should be scientifically proven and based on evidence. Not only that, but you see some of our literature evangelists are selling some of these teas without any proper studies, which can cause damage to the person. It's very important that we stick to what we call evidence-based medicine. Okay, what about the contradiction between the Holy Bible and evidence-based medicine? It's true. Sometimes there could be a contradiction. The studies are going to say this is all right. An example for this is, instance, alcohol. There are some studies that say that alcohol is good for your health, and as a result, you should take 1 glass of wine. Now, if there is going to be a contradiction, our basis should be the Bible. Well, if you are also going to look into that study which they did about alcohol good for the heart, they found out it was flawed. It had so many faults in it. So it is a wrong conclusion. But whenever there's going to be a discrepancy between the Bible and scientific evidence, let us stick to the Bible. Okay, health reform. Now that we have talked about health reform, we might as well talk about health reform. Really, if you think about health reform, the basis is trust in God. That's number one. Why? How can we stick to our diet, the original diet that God has given us, if we do not trust Him? So if we have trust in God, it is very easy for us to follow what He tells us to do. Okay, so the original or health reform is based on the original diet, which is found in Genesis 1:29. Herbs and vegetables were added, the use of eggs and milk, and of course, refraining from the non-use of harmful substances. Temperance in what is good in life. Okay, we'll explain that later. Regular health checkups, the use of medications and vaccinations. Okay. Remember that in the Bible, when God created man and woman, one of the first instructions that He gave man in Genesis 1:29 is food. He says, go and multiply and replenish the earth. And after that, He says, well, these are the things that you can eat. Fruits, grains, nuts, legumes, and tubers. And really, scientists have been all the time coming up with a conclusion that really these kind of foods are going to help us from getting sick. In fact, cancer, for instance, can be prevented by taking fruits and vegetables, okay? Now, herbs were added, or vegetables, if you notice, it was not part of the original diet. It only came later on when man fell into sin. Why? It's because God realized that when man sinned, there's going to be disease, there's going to be pain, there's going to be suffering. And so He said, okay, you should eat the herbs of the field. And it's true. Even today, they have found out that some of the drugs, about 1/3 of all the drugs, come from herbs and come from plants, but they have been purified and they have been studied. Okay, sorry. Sorry, I pressed the wrong button. And it went back to the first part. Okay, here we are now. Okay. Let us go into the vegetarians, because there are so many types of vegetarians, but really, the strict definition of a vegetarian is a person who does not use any flesh meat, whether it's going to be chicken, whether it's going to be fish, or whether it's going to be cattle meat. That's a vegetarian. The lacto-ovo vegetarian is the person who uses eggs and milk and cheese. And this is the type of vegetarianism that the church is really promoting. Okay. What do we mean? Because you see, these days, people are saying, I am a vegan. Now, we should be very careful about the term, because you see, when you say vegan, it actually means that you are an animal rights proponent. In fact, if you are a strict vegan, you are not supposed to wear any shoes because it comes from leather. You're not supposed to use any belt or any handbags, because you see, that is based on the fact of what we call reincarnation. You see, the doctrine of reincarnation states that if you are good in this life, then you might be what we call promoted to a higher form of life. But if you are bad, you're beating your wife, you are using drugs, then maybe when you die, your soul is going to go to the dog, your soul is going to go maybe to a sheep. If not, it's going to go to a mosquito, it's going to become a fly. And this is it. And that's the reason why they do not use animal products, because you see, it is really against what we call reincarnation. Because, for instance, if your daughter has been very bad and she died, and in her next life, she becomes maybe a rat. And here you are, you're going to kill the rat, and that means that you're killing your daughter. So veganism actually is having its roots in what we call the doctrine of reincarnation, which is just a reflection of the original lie of Satan, which says, you are not going to die. Okay. We should refrain from these harmful substances, coffee, tea, marijuana, whatever drugs there are, morphine, alcohol. And it's true, as a church, we are very strong, especially on alcohol and smoking. Okay. Whereas in temperance, we should be very careful when we have temperance, because you see, your temperance has to be regulated. Meaning, for instance, sunshine. If you are going to have excess sunshine, you can develop what we call skin cancer. If you are going to have an overdose of fresh air, as I said, you might even drown. And similarly with nutrition, similarly with salt, similarly with sugar, similarly with oil, we have to be what we call temperate. We are not going to go into excess. Regular health checkups. I wonder how many of us here have undergone what we call checkups. Some of us are very particular when it comes to our cars. We regularly service our cars, 15,000, 30,000, 40,000. Oh, it's time to service my car. But when it comes to our body, I wonder whether we are very particular. If we are very serious about our cars, we should be even more serious when it comes to our bodies. You should check your blood pressure, diabetes, and all that. And of course, there are medications. If a doctor is going to prescribe medications, you should take that medication because it is going to prolong your life. It is going to prevent complications. Like, for instance, high blood pressure. If you take the medication for high blood pressure, it is going to prevent you from having a heart attack, having a stroke, having kidney failure. It is going to lengthen your life. It is also improve the quality of your life. Well, some people say vaccines can make you crazy. Some people say can make... It's true, there are some side effects. But maybe out of 100,000, you have maybe 1 or 2 people who are going to develop that. So it is, in fact, overall, a life-saving measure. So if there are any vaccinations that are needed, you should take it. Okay. Now, of course, health reform is not 100% guarantee that you are not going to be sick. Isn't it? You say, well, if I'm going to follow all those rules, am I not going to be sick? Well, it is not 100% guarantee. Why? It's because we have the devil. Not only that, but we are living in a world of sin. I know of a very close friend of mine, Dina. She was a strict vegetarian, doing regular exercise, and she was diagnosed with lung cancer. And lung cancer, of course, you say it's in smoking. She didn't smoke all the time. She was a strict vegetarian. Why? It's because of the air that we are breathing. All the cars that are around the city are polluting. The factories are polluting our environment. So here is a lady who has been actually very faithful, and yet she got sick. That's why I'm telling you, it is not 100% guarantee. Remember also Job. Job was a man who was perfect in God's sight, and yet he got sick. Because you see, we have the devil around us, and so many things we still do not understand about medicine. Okay? What is important that we should not be judgmental. Oh, the pastor got sick of high blood. I know he got sick because he's eating meat when he's just alone. Oh, that person, how come he has actually some prostate cancer? Oh, I know. See? We become judgmental and we come, oh, that guy was sick. I cannot believe that that guy was a vegetarian. No. It's very important that we become supportive of each other and what we call be loving and non-judgmental to each other. In fact, we should be very supportive because a person who is going to contract this disease really needs our help, really needs our support. Okay? And finally, it is really God's intention that we should be healthy and happy. And as a result, he actually says in 3 John 2, I wish you to be healthy, both soul and body. God is not only concerned about our spiritual health, God is also concerned about our physical well-being. And that's the reason, out of his love, he gave these guidelines to us. And I pray that we are going to accept these guidelines that God has given us as good stewards and also as our response to our love for him. Thank you.
Dr. Llaguno, for the wonderful presentation. Thank you very much.